The third general knew the silence would not last forever, and the waiting was worse than the bullet itself. Every dawn he stepped into the camp with his armor polished and his head held high, but inside his chest his heart pounded like a drum of war that never ceased. He felt her presence in every shadow. He felt her breath in every gust of wind. He felt the weight of her scope upon the back of his neck, even when no shot came. He told his soldiers that fear was weakness, and weakness meant death, yet. He saw the way their eyes darted to the rooftops. He saw the way their hands trembled when they carried rifles. He saw how sleep slipped away from them, leaving their faces pale and hollow, and though he scolded them, he knew their terror was the mirror of his own. So he prepared his final trap. He ordered decoy camps built with fires burning at night to lure her scope. He commanded patrols to move in circles like prey, pretending to wander. He placed hidden marksmen in towers. With instructions to shoot at any shadow, he ordered nets strung between walls and alleyways as if she could be caught like an animal. The camp became a maze of tricks and snares, each torch carefully placed, each sound calculated to draw her eye, and the general believed his plan was flawless. He believed he had turned the hunter into the hunted, and he told himself that patience could not belong only to her. He told himself that he too could wait until she stepped into his snare. But she watched. From afar, unmoved by the lights and fires, she studied the patterns, and she saw the falsehood in every step, the patrols too regular, the shadows too controlled, the towers too still. She understood that his traps were built of fear, not strength, and she let his illusion stand while she remained unseen. The nights grew colder, and the soldiers muttered that the sniper was no longer human, that no mortal could wait so long without striking, that she must be a spirit moving with the night, and each day that passed without a shot only deepened their dread. The silence was more dangerous than gunfire, for it broke the mind before it broke the body. The general cursed the silence. He cursed the waiting, and though he held his head high before his men, he raged within his tent at night. His maps torn by trembling hands, his cups of wine spilled across the floor. He swore aloud that he would end her himself if his soldiers failed, and the fire in his voice was more desperate than commanding. The sniper moved closer with each passing night, never revealing herself, always watching, her eye steady against the glass of her scope. Her breathing slow, her finger brushing the trigger, then falling back again. She could have ended him in any of those moments, but she did not, for she understood that fear was the greater weapon, and she wielded it with precision. One night, the general walked among his men, speaking of courage, speaking of victory, and though his tone was iron, he felt the weight of her eyes pressing from somewhere unseen. He looked up at the rooftops. He looked to the shadows, and he felt as though the darkness itself leaned toward him, waiting for the moment he faltered. His soldiers whispered that the sniper was already inside the camp, that she had passed their walls unseen, that she was breathing among them with each step they took. They believed she could see their thoughts. They believed no wall, no fire, no trap could keep her away. And still, she did not fire. Still she waited. The general grew weary, though he tried to hide it. His eyes darkened with sleeplessness. His voice cracked when he shouted orders, and his men began to doubt him. They saw that the silence had worn him thin. They saw that his strength was becoming a mask that crumbled with each sunrise. They followed him still, but with the hollow obedience of men who expect death with every breath. The sniper remained above the ruins, her patience unbroken, her mind as still as the stones beneath her rifle. She watched him walk, she watched him speak, she watched him falter, and she knew the moment was nearing. She knew he had set his traps not for her, but for his own fear, and the snares that lay across the battlefield were already tightening around his spirit. At dawn, the camp stirred with exhaustion, the soldiers dragging themselves to their posts. The general stood once more at the center, his head tilted to the rising light. He told himself today, She would strike. Today, he would see. Her today the waiting would end. And though his words echoed strong, he felt the trembling in his chest, as though the bullet had already found him, and far above, unseen and patient, she shifted her rifle once more, her finger brushing the trigger, her eye never leaving him, her silence deeper than the night itself. For she knew the end had come and there would be no escape for the last general. The final dawn rose heavy over the camp, its light spilling across the ruins like blood over stone. The soldiers stirred with hollow eyes, their movements slow, their hands weak upon their weapons. They had not slept, they had not eaten. Their courage was thin as paper, and every breath they drew was laced with dread, for they knew the silence could not last forever. The general stood at the center of the camp, his armor shining faintly in the pale sun, his face hard but pale. His eyes ringed with sleepless nights. He spoke loudly. He told his men that today would end the ghost that haunted them, that the sniper would finally reveal herself, and that their traps would crush her once and for all. His words rang out across the courtyard, yet no cheer followed, only the whisper of wind through broken walls. He looked to the horizon, where the city lay shattered and gray. He imagined her there, hidden behind some stone, watching him, her rifle steady, her eyes locked on him. He shivered, though he would not show it. He clenched his fists and raised his voice higher, calling for his men to trust in the walls and the towers and the snares they had built. Yet even as he spoke, he knew that walls had failed before that towers had fallen, that snares had caught only shadows. The sniper lay hidden above the ruins, her rifle steady, her cheek pressed. To the worn wood, her breath calm, her eyes fixed through the scope. She could see every detail of him, the way his shoulders shifted under his armor, the way his jaw tightened, the faint tremor of his hand as he raised it to point at nothing. She measured the distance, she measured the wind, she measured the perfect stillness of the moment. She could have fired then and ended it quickly, but she did not, for she had learned the greatest weapon was not the bullet, but the waiting. She let the moment stretch thin. She let the silence weigh heavier than steel. She let the soldiers feel her presence pressing against their backs like an invisible hand ready to strike. The general paced across the courtyard, his boots striking stone, his eyes darting to every tower, every rooftop, every shadow. He barked orders. He told his men to stay sharp, to watch the walls, to guard the gates. Yet even as he spoke, his words faltered, his voice cracking like old wood. And his men heard it. They heard the weakness bleeding through his tone. The sniper watched and waited, her finger brushing the trigger. Her eye never leaving him, she saw how the men shifted uneasily around him, how their rifles drooped, how their courage broke piece by piece like glass under strain. She saw that his command was crumbling before her bullet had even struck. The wind shifted. The sun climbed higher, and the general stopped at the edge of the camp, staring outward into the ruins as if he could pierce the veil of stone and shadow and find her there. He raised his hand as though daring her to take the shot, his chest broad. His chin lifted, a final challenge from a man who knew the end was already closing in. She inhaled slow, her breath steady, her heartbeat calm, her eye aligned. Her finger pressed the trigger, and the silence shattered like glass. The shot cracked across the camp and through the heart of the last general. He fell before his men, his armor ringing against the stone, his hand reaching once toward the sky before, collapsing limp upon the ground. The soldiers froze in horror. None dared move. None dared speak. Their general, their last shield, their last hope lay dead before them, struck down by a single bullet from an enemy they could not see. And in that silence, they knew the bounty meant nothing. They knew their cause meant nothing. They knew that they were all already broken. The sniper lowered her rifle, her eyes still cold, still steady. She did not smile. She did not speak. She simply vanished back into The ruins, her presence dissolving into shadow like smoke into the wind. She left behind no trace, no word, only the silence and the bodies of 3 fallen generals. The camp trembled with fear. Men dropped their weapons. Men fled into the ruins. Men prayed aloud for mercy. But no answer came. Only the echo of the shot that would haunt them forever. For they understood now that the bounty had never been upon her head. It had been upon theirs from the beginning. And somewhere in the distance, she walked alone through the ruins, her rifle upon her back, her eyes sharp upon the horizon, for the war was not over, and her hunt had only just begun. The first general was gone, his boast cut short by a single shot that echoed through the ruins like thunder, and though his soldiers swore vengeance, none of them dared to step into the open square again. They dragged his body away in silence, their banners drooping like wilted flowers, their courage scattered with the dust. Rumors spread faster than fire through dry grass. Every camp, every patrol spoke of that moment, of the way he fell without warning, without mercy, and though the generals told their men to stay firm. The truth weighed heavy. The sniper had struck, and her shadow stretched over them all. The second general was different. He was not careless. Like the first, he was cautious, a man who measured every step twice and trusted no one. He chose not to march into the open, but to hide behind walls of steel and glass. He believed that fortresses built by men could keep out the bullet that had claimed his comrade. He ordered guards to surround him at every hour, the best marksmen. The strongest soldiers. He demanded reinforcements at the gates and watchtowers, filled with eyes scanning the night for a flicker of danger. His fortress became a prison of fear, and yet he believed he was safe. He believed walls could turn a hunter blind. The sniper, however, had already marked him. She knew his habits, his routes, his manner of walking through the corridors with hands clasped behind his back. She knew he liked to stand by the tall window overlooking the courtyard, as if the glass was a mirror that reflected his power and his pride. She moved like a shadow never seen, never heard through the broken streets beyond the fortress, her boots sinking silently into the dust, her breath slow as she studied every angle, every tower. Every vantage point. She measured distance like others measure time, and every step brought her closer to the site she wanted. Inside the fortress, soldiers whispered. They remembered the fate of the first general. They remembered the shot that split, the silence, and they asked themselves if their walls would be enough to shield them. They patrolled with trembling hands and eyes that refused to meet the windows, for they too felt the weight of her gaze pressing through the night. The second general scolded them. He called them weak. He told them to remember that they were inside the strongest fortress in the region. He laughed that no rifle could pierce walls so thick and no sniper could see through glass reinforced with iron. But the soldiers heard the crack in his laughter and the doubt beneath it. Days passed without a shot, and the general began to believe his own words. He dined at long tables. He raised his voice in false laughter, and he stood at the window each night, staring into the darkness beyond, as though daring her to show herself. He did not realize that his defiance was not a challenge, but an invitation. The sniper lay in silence high above the city, her rifle balanced against stone. Her eye pressed to the scope. She had waited for nights without moving more than a breath, her patience deeper than hunger, deeper than sleep. She watched the window and the figure that appeared again and again like a ritual. She traced every line of his movement, the way he leaned forward, the way he rested his hand on the sill as if claiming ownership of the world beyond. She measured the wind. She measured the angle. She measured the pulse that beat steady in her ears. And she knew the fortress was not a shield, but a stage. When the night came again, and the general stood before the window, his hands behind his back, his face lit by the faint glow of lamps, she inhaled slow and deep, her finger brushing the trigger, her heartbeat steady, her mind empty of everything but the single point in her sight. The glass shattered before the echo of the shot reached the walls, shards falling like rain as the general collapsed backward, his blood painting the floor beneath him. His guards rushed forward, their cries filling the halls. But they were already too late. The fortress built of stone and steel had become his tomb. Panic spread through the corridors. Soldiers ran to the gates. Soldiers screamed orders into the dark. But no reply came, only the memory of the crack that had silenced their leader forever. Their fortress had failed. Their walls had meant nothing against the patience of a ghost. The soldiers searched the rooftops. They searched the hills. They fired blindly into the night. But no target revealed itself. The sniper was already gone, leaving behind only fear and silence, and the knowledge that 2 generals had fallen and only 1 remained, and that last general knew his time was coming. The death of the 2nd general broke the illusion of safety, and silence filled the camps, more suffocating than smoke. The walls of steel and glass that he trusted had shattered as easily as bone, and now the soldiers whispered of curses and ghosts. They spoke her name with trembling lips, afraid that even the sound would call her upon them. The bounty was raised again higher than before, and mercenaries from distant lands came drawn by the promise of gold. They arrived with pride in their voices, claiming no sniper could outwit them. They boasted of hunts in mountains and deserts. They swore they would bring her head on a pike. And yet the streets where they walked grew empty by dawn, for the morning always revealed bodies, and the whispers grew louder each day. The 3rd general, the last one, still standing, was unlike the others. He did not laugh at the bounty, nor did he trust walls to guard him. He was cunning, a man who had survived by thinking 3 steps ahead of his enemies. He knew she would come for him. He knew she could not resist, for vengeance had guided her through the ruins, and now only he remained between her and silence. He studied the patterns of her strikes. He ordered scouts to gather fragments of stories from survivors. He pieced together a shadow of her habits, and he laid snares across the battlefield, traps designed to lure her into his reach. He placed decoys on rooftops. He stationed bait patrols in alleys. He lit fires in abandoned buildings to draw her scope. His soldiers believed this time would be different, for their general spoke with confidence and calm. He told them she was not a spirit. She was flesh and blood. And flesh and blood could bleed his words, carried like iron, yet beneath his armor of command. Even he felt the chill that lingered in the air. He felt the invisible presence of the hunter who had already claimed 2 of his kind. The sniper moved in silence through the traps. She saw the bait patrols. She counted the decoys. She read the patterns like a book, and knew that the last general was clever. But cleverness could not match patience. She had learned long ago that war was not won by rushing forward, but by waiting for the single breath when victory revealed itself. She crouched upon the broken remains of a church tower, her rifle resting against stone, her eyes sweeping across the lines of soldiers below. They walked stiffly, their heads turning sharply at shadows, their rifles shaking as though each finger upon the trigger longed to fire at emptiness to release the fear that coiled in their chests. The general stood at the heart of his camp, surrounded by torches that painted him in light, his posture tall, his eyes hard as he gave orders to his captains. He wanted her to see him. He wanted her to aim. He wanted to draw her into the open, for he believed he was ready to answer the bullet with a storm of fire. But she did not fire. She watched him. She measured his pride. She traced the way his guards circled him like hounds. And she waited. She knew he expected her tonight, and so tonight she would not strike. She would let his expectation gnaw at him until his strength faltered, until he became the prey he feared to be. Days passed, and the general grew restless, though he spoke boldly to his men at night. He paced within his tent, staring at maps, his hands trembling as if the paper itself carried the weight of death. He placed double watches on the towers. He ordered his men to stay awake in shifts, yet none could shake the sense that their eyes were already upon the edge of a scope. The sniper moved closer each night, never firing, never revealing herself. Her silence was the weapon now. It pressed down upon the camp like a storm that never broke. Soldiers jumped at the cry of an owl they fired, into shadows, and found nothing. They began to doubt their general. They began to fear the dawn itself. When the general stepped outside before sunrise, thinking to calm his men, he found them haggard, their faces pale, their voices cracked by sleeplessness. He told them to stand firm. He told them that no ghost could wait forever. But even as he spoke, he felt the weight of her patience pressing down upon him like a hand upon his throat. The sun climbed over the ruins, painting the horizon in red. The general raised his head to the light as though daring the sniper to take the shot. But still, she did not move. Still, she did not fire. She let the silence linger. She let it grow until even the strongest of his soldiers began to break inside. And, somewhere high above, hidden in the remains of stone, she shifted her rifle, her eye never leaving the figure of the last general, her breath steady, her finger still resting light against the trigger, knowing that the end was near, and that he could sense it too. The war had already scarred the land, turning every road into dust and every house into rubble, and still the soldiers marched carrying orders that no longer sounded like commands of men, but like the echoes of ghosts calling them forward into darkness. The villages that once sang with children now echoed only with the rustle of the wind and the hiss of fire that never seemed to die down. And in that silence a name drifted from camp to camp like smoke from a battlefield, a name that caused even the most hardened fighters to pause and glance over their shoulders as if expecting the shadow of death itself. They spoke of the female sniper, the unseen hunter whose single shot had ended columns, whose presence had broken the courage of entire units. And they spoke of her with voices low, as if the wind itself might carry their words to her waiting ears. When the bounty was announced, it was not spoken in confidence, but shouted across the lines like a challenge, like an invitation to all who craved gold or glory or even survival, a fortune promised for the one who would end her reign of terror. Soldiers whispered in tents at night that the reward was enough to buy freedom, enough to buy a kingdom, enough to make a traitor out of any ally. And yet none of them dared to say aloud that taking the bounty meant facing the invisible eye that never blinked and the trigger that never missed. The generals had no doubt they believed she was nothing more than a rumor, a phantom crafted by fear and hunger. But still, they set the bounty still. They painted her face on posters nailed to the walls of ruined cities, her eyes staring out from every torn paper as though she herself had placed them there as a warning. In every tavern, in every hushed market, where survivors traded scraps for life, men argued about her story. Some said she was once a farmer who had lost her family and sworn vengeance. Others swore she had been a soldier trained by masters in the art of killing from a distance. Others still claimed she was not human at all, but the spirit of war itself dressed in human flesh. What none of them knew was that she moved even now through the ruins of the city, her steps silent as dust, her breath steady her hands, steady her mind sharper than the blade of any knife she carried, and every corner she passed became her vantage, every rooftop her throne. Her eyes were never still. They searched every shadow, every flicker of light, every hint of movement, not out of fear, but out of instinct for survival had burned itself into her bones, and she knew that the bounty had changed everything. She was no longer a ghost that haunted them. She was prey and predator, both hunted and hunter at the same time. From the rooftops, she could see the soldiers below their rifles clutched tightly, their eyes darting from alley to alley like children lost in a maze, and she almost smiled, though her lips never moved, for they thought they were hunting her. Yet every step they took was inside the range of her sights. The bounty had placed her in their minds, and that was the first victory, for fear had already begun its work before a single shot was fired. She could see it, in the way they gripped their weapons too tightly, in the way they hesitated at open doors, in the way they tried to convince themselves they were brave when every heartbeat betrayed them. Night fell slowly over the ruins, the smoke of burned buildings twisting into the dark sky, and in that hour, she waited, her rifle resting quietly across her knees, her mind reaching out beyond the silence, listening for the faintest tremor of movement. The smallest slip of sound, the kind of sound only the hunted make. Somewhere far across the line, a general laughed, his voice carrying like thunder as he spoke of the bounty. His words meant to rally his men to give them courage. But even he did not know that his voice had already reached ears that would remember it with perfect clarity. The fire cracked the wind, shifted, and the city slept under the weight of soldiers who thought themselves safe, who thought the bounty was the noose tightening around the neck of the sniper. What they did not realize was that the noose was already looped around their own say. Bounty was not a curse upon her head. It was a signal. It was the invitation she had been waiting for, a chance to draw them out, to make them believe they had power, when in truth they had only revealed themselves as the moon climbed above the broken rooftops. Her rifle rose with it, her eyes narrowing on the horizon, her finger steady against the trigger. The game had begun, and only she knew how it would end. The generals gathered inside a dim hall where maps of broken cities lay scattered across. The tables, their faces lined with arrogance as they spoke of the bounty as if it were already the key to their triumph. They told their men that the female sniper was a myth, that a single bullet could not decide the fate of an army, and yet none of them could keep the tremor from their voices when her name was whispered. They sent spies into the ruins. They sent trackers through forests and mountains. They promised silver and land to anyone who returned with proof of her death. But those who went did not return, at least, not alive. Some were found by their comrades, their eyes wide open, as though they had glimpsed her in the last instant. Others were never found at all, and so the fear deepened even as the bounty was raised higher. At night, the camps grew restless. Men who once sang war songs now muttered prayers under their breath as the silence pressed against them like a weight they could not shake. And still the generals insisted that she was close, that she was watching, that her silence was the silence of a beast waiting for prey to walk willingly into its jaws. The soldiers patrolled in pairs, their rifles shaking in their hands as they searched the rooftops and shattered windows every flicker of movement brought. Their weapons up every shadow made them curse under their breath, and though they never saw her, they felt her eyes upon them with every step. The bounty posters flapped in the cold wind, nailed to broken walls, her face drawn in charcoal with sharp eyes and steady features, though none of them could be sure if the drawing was true or if it was only the creation of frightened men who had never seen her. They stared at those posters as if the woman might step out of the paper itself. Hunters came from far-away men who claimed to be mercenaries, men who claimed to have killed for less. They carried knives and rifles and smiled as they spoke of how easy it would be to kill a single woman. But by morning, their laughter was gone. Their bodies left where no one expected, and their weapons missing as if she had taken them as trophies. The first general still laughed at the stories he called his men cowards. He said she was only a rat hiding in the cracks of ruined buildings, and he boasted that he would walk through the heart of the captured city to prove she could not touch him. He promised a feast at the square and ordered his guards to march proudly with banners raised high. What he did not see was the way his men lowered their eyes when he spoke, the way their shoulders tightened at the thought of marching where the sniper might be waiting. They obeyed, but they obeyed with dread, each footstep heavy as though dragging chains through the dust. The female sniper watched. From above her position, chosen long before his boast had left his lips, her breathing calm, her heart steady, her scope tracing the path of the general as he strutted through the city with the arrogance of a man who believed himself untouchable. She did not rush. She did not flinch, for patience was her greatest weapon. The crowd gathered silent, their faces gray with hunger and fear. None dared cheer, none dared move. They knew what might come, for they too had heard the whispers of the ghost, who haunted the enemy, the ghost who had now become a legend with a bounty larger than the weight of gold any of them had ever seen. The general raised his hand as if to wave to the people. He shouted that the sniper was nothing but a tale, a lie, told by those too weak to fight, and that he would prove it by walking unharmed through the heart of the ruins. His voice echoed against broken walls and shattered glass, carrying like thunder through the square. High above in the ruins, she shifted, the rifle gently, the scope steady upon him, her finger resting lightly on the trigger. As her breath slowed, she could hear her own heartbeat steady as a drum against the silence of the crowd below. She watched the way his lips curled, the way he smirked, the way he turned his back to the people as if daring her to strike. She waited one more second, letting the arrogance settle, letting the silence deepen until the moment became unbearable. Then the shot rang out sharp and clear, slicing through the square and through the general, his words cut short, his body collapsing like a puppet with strings cut. The soldiers froze, their rifles half raised, their eyes wide with terror. None dared move, none dared speak. The crowd gasped, but not a sound. Followed only the echo of that single shot rolling across the ruins like the toll of a bell. And then silence returned, silence heavy and unbroken, silence that told them all she was still there, watching, waiting, choosing her next target.